The Harper's letter
don't know.
caused a bit of a stir online and quite a bit of backlash, and it is worth thinking about a little bit. We didn't get to it in our last podcast, but in any case, what it does is it groups a number of people. It was written by 5 people.
It's from July 7th, it looks like.
July 7th. Thomas Chatterton Williams is the most prominent spokesman for the letter. But it's been signed by 100+ people, many of whom are friends of ours from the long battle for civil liberties that we've been involved in. But in any case,
it's also got big names on the left in particular, who we have not yet come to meet, but people like Katha Pollitt and J.K. Rowling, and I'm just looking down the list really quickly. Salman Rushdie. So a lot. It's quite an impressive list of signatories.
Yeah, which is part of the problem with it. So you want to scroll up and show the letter?
You want me to scroll up and you want Zach to show the letter?
Yeah. There we go. So here's the letter. For some reason, Harper's debuted this to great fanfare online, but they're not going to publish it on paper until October for some reason. That's a conspicuous oddity about it. But in any case, as I see it, the problem with the letter is that it is incredibly tepid with respect.
Hold on, sorry, but it's presumably it's going into the hard copy magazine in October because that's right before the election. I mean, that's what that timing is about. They're going to say something about the timing of how long it takes to get things into print and all of this. But
okay.
It's also, this isn't an October surprise, but it's trying to be something like that.
So let's talk about what the problems are. One, it is an incredibly tepid defense of freedom of expression. And 2, it is divisive twice over. The letter goes to great pains to portray the problem of censoriousness as a right-wing problem at a moment when, in fact, the right wing contains many people who have been courageous in our defense, for example, while the left or the mainstream left was feeding us to the wolves. And so at this moment in history, to say that actually the problem, that free speech faces a problem, it comes from the right, but in this case we're seeing hints of it on the left, is just simply not accurate. And it is unkind to people who have been courageous in the defense of people across the aisle like us. So, for example, Robbie George has been very courageous in our defense. You can see his testimony, and maybe you can't see it because at the point the Democrats took over the House, they eliminated the video in which he testified on the same panel that I was on. If anybody has that video, I'd like it. We had it, but I can't locate it. In any case, he defended us. He is right of center. And he deserves to be recognized for that rather than to be portrayed as part of the political spectrum that doesn't understand the value of these rights. So the letter takes great pains to portray the right as the problem, to suggest that the left is beginning to show signs, which is not true. The left has a massive problem with these civil liberties at the moment. And then the letter divides a second time by bringing certain people into the list of signatories and not inviting others. So there are many of us on the left who never saw the letter until it emerged. We were surprised at its existence. Now, if you and I had been asked, I am sure I would not have signed it. And I believe what I would have done is I would have responded that there was a lot wrong with the text of the letter, and I would have tried to get them to correct it. And I don't know whether that would have had any success or not. But what I do know is that we were specifically not asked, while people like Matt Iglesias are prominently featured in the list of signatories. So we weren't asked. I know that Sam Harris wasn't asked. And so consider the following puzzle. Sam Harris has been absolutely courageous and steadfast in his defense of free expression, the free exchange of ideas. Matt Iglesias has been on the wrong side of this issue until the last few weeks when he has finally apparently woken up. Now, I would say welcome to him if he's finally gotten it. But to sideline somebody like Sam Harris as you bring Matt Iglesias into what appears to many to be the forefront of this battle is preposterous. For one thing, it makes an implication about why Sam isn't there. I know from talking to a number of the people on the list that they did not know who was to be asked and who wasn't to be asked. So the absence of Sam Harris could mean he refused to sign. It could mean that there's something about Sam Harris that makes him an inappropriate person to be asked. And the thing is, I believe many people have that sense, but where did they get it? They got it from people like Matt Iglesias. So to have the press portray people like Sam as somehow beyond the pale, to stigmatize them, and then for this letter to exclude them on the basis that that stigma makes them controversial, when really all they were doing was defending the most central rights that we ought to all be defending, is the height of lunacy. So in any case, the letter is troubling. I believe we ought to be troubled by it. And just to say one final thing, to bring all of these important voices, including Thomas Chatterton Williams, including Jonathan Haidt, Barry Weiss, to bring them all on as signatories to a letter that then divides us twice over, has compromised the movement to protect these civil liberties rather than enhanced it. And that's why I'm upset about it.
And in the final paragraph, it's a short letter, but in the final of 3, I think, paragraphs, one sentence is, "The way to defeat bad ideas is by exposure, argument, and persuasion, not by trying to silence or wish them away." Sure, of course. The next sentence, "We refuse any false choice between justice and freedom, which cannot exist without each other." So that's worth a little exploration, isn't it? The far left would actually publicly mock the idea of caring about freedom because justice is the preeminent value. And the far right tends to hold quite the inverse, right? Inverse values, that freedom is paramount and justice not be damned, but justice will suffer at the hands of freedom. And so we have, to some degree, to the degree that the polls, the left-right polls in politics are coherent, you do have people sliding the trade-off for increasing justice at some small cost to freedom on the left, and people sliding to increase freedom at some small cost to justice on the right. But this suggests that pointing that out as a choice, that as if justice and freedom are in trade-off relationship with one another, is false. And that's facile. That actually doesn't have much representation in the world.
Well, I guess I'm not sure exactly what you're saying. There is a trade-off relationship, but the idea that one needs to choose, is obviously incorrect. The question is, where's the sweet spot? And, what was the genesis of this letter relative to those things? And,
Well, so it's possible that they mean to say that there are people on the right who want freedom and no justice. I've actually never even heard that caricature.
No, it's a priority.
I've never heard the caricature of the people on the left that they want no freedom. They're, the far left, or the people on the right want no justice. So that would be a caricature that I don't think is what they're engaging in. So if I read this with a little bit more care, less desire to caricature the intention here, the idea that there's never a choice is wrong, actually, because they are in trade-off with one another. And it seems to me that this letter is misunderstanding that point, which is, in fact, I think, a point that is misunderstood across the political spectrum, but particularly likely to be misunderstood in sort of leftish wing intellectual circles. The idea of trade-offs being not a desirable, but a reality of the human experience and of just the world that you can't get around no matter how much you don't like it.
Yeah, they're a design constraint. And, we can have endless arguments about which thing is more important, but the answer is, how do you find the sweet spot in which you give up, a small amount of justice for freedom and a small amount of freedom for justice, rather than keep pushing the slider around and suffering the catastrophes that result.
So, maybe I'm reading too much into this, and it's just, it's a short letter, and there, with 2 more sentences, there could have been nuance that was clear here. But I do think that reveals again the the bias of the letter, which would slate anyone who is right of some line that is ever more difficult to draw, as not just a conservative and not just maybe a Republican, but someone who is working with the forces of a liberalism. And it's not a fair characterization.
Well, and in some sense, I don't think this is designed to be a fair characterization. What I have the sense has happened is that a bunch of people who, and I must say, in some sense, I'm borrowing heavily here from Eric, the journalists seem to have some kind of a carve-out where things that were happening on campus were understood to be a separate phenomenon, and journalists portrayed them as unimportant because they did not understand that they would be in the line of fire soon enough. And so having suddenly found themselves in the line of fire, you can read Matt Taibbi's piece on this, and you can discover how all of these important newsrooms, including places that you would expect to be most immune, like, for example, The Intercept, are having these horizontal revolutions take place inside of them. So as that's coming for journalists, and they are suddenly discovering that they don't have the safety that they thought they had, that their appeasement is resulting in a predictable outcome where they're now suddenly being targeted, there's a desire to carve out some sort of new agreement. And that new agreement is, why is the letter so deferential to the left, which frankly has done a terrible job of policing these challenges to the free exchange of ideas? Well, in part because what this really is a negotiation. But I don't think Jonathan Haidt would be negotiating. I think Jonathan Haidt, and I'm just using him as an example of an important voice who I believe has been brought into this under somewhat false pretenses, but the thing that needed to happen was a statement in which, first of all, everybody who had properly defended these rights was invited on, and B, that didn't divide us further, thereby hobbling the effort to fight the censorious instincts. But what ended up happening is the attempt to negotiate some sort of agreement that would again give these journalists and academics some kind of immunity from what's moving across society, has now taken the voices that were clearest and put them in this compromised context. So I think it's very unfortunate that it's happened, and we need to be very careful that it doesn't happen again, because all sorts of people are going to discover they're suddenly in the line of fire, and they're going to attempt to carve something out. And lots of people are going to look at it and say, well, I'm in favor of free expression of ideas, therefore I should sign on to everything that comes my way that points in that direction. But the point is, no. Sign on to the ones that are right. Don't sign on to the ones where somebody's trying to accomplish something and they put it loosely in the terms of free expression of ideas. And so, it's in the ballpark, because the in the ballpark stuff is not refined enough to be useful. It's going to do exactly the opposite thing.